So we're going to kind of continue remorselessly into the first dhyana now. But I think before we do that, I said there'd be an opportunity for any further questions or observations before we go on. So did anyone have any? Well, I assume nobody had any thoughts at all during the lunch break, but it might be that you did. So any questions or observations coming out of this morning or what we've done so far? Oh.
Hello.
Oh, hi.
Hello. Just to say, I don't know if anyone else is feeling like this, but I get a real lull in energy at this time of day. And I just noticed a thought. There's like first dhyana. I'm going to be going to sleep. So I know that I can keep my eyes open, but I just thought I'd sort of say it out loud. Just if you've got any thoughts about that, other than kind of keeping your eyes open and keeping your energy sort of up here.
Yeah.
I think there's just a feeling of that. Oh no, that's not going to happen. That kind of unhelpful kind of doubt, I think.
Well, it's good to recognise it, isn't it? That it is doubt and it is unhelpful. And at the same time, it may happen. I mean, it's just like if you've been eating, all of your consciousness goes down into digesting it, doesn't it? So that is a thing with. I always find it on weekend workshops. I mean, it's different on retreats because you've got a bigger break in the afternoon and you can actually have a nap. But there probably isn't time to do that during lunch break. So it's just something you have to work with. And I mean, bearing in mind that this is being recorded, I've already got this morning's stuff up on the Vajraloka Dropbox, and I'll share that with all of you. But I'll find a way of doing so anyway. So just bear in mind that may happen. And to be honest, if you start feeling sleepy, you can do what I suggested this morning, but I haven't got many other suggestions other than you can always listen to it again and especially go through the whatever lead practice we have this afternoon when you are really awake. So that's the advantage of the recording.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Okay, so just a bit of a resume. So we've been exploring the body as a way into initially access into presence in the body and presence in the area of the body that we're, whichever area of the body we're focusing on, whichever area of the breath we're focusing on for the practice. So access enables us to be much more present in our experience. I think that's why it's important to get there, so to speak. And access, sorry, this sounds a bit silly, but access is very accessible. It is actually not so difficult to get into if you understand that it's simply whenever the hindrances are in abeyance. And we're not in the gross hindrances all the time. There might be more subtle hindrances around, but you don't really need to worry about those. They kind of, if you become more absorbed, they will kind of drop away as well. But access, it's really the point at which your meditation, whatever kind of meditation you're doing, becomes much more effective because you really are present in your experience. And from there you can do great just sitting, you can do great metabhavana, you can do any practice in a much more full and integrated way. So access in this sense is a good place to be. It's what we would where we would ideally be meditating. Admittedly, it can sometimes seem almost impossible to get into access just because the mind is proliferating so much. But then again, those are things that we need to work with somewhat separately as well. And I'm not going to go into that in any detail right now. What I'm presenting is the primary way into settling the mind. So we primarily settle the mind by coming into the body. And then towards the end of the morning, I just pointed to looking at the sense of the body sensations as kind of energetic and sort of tingly. Now, that's a useful observation to make directly, because that can be a help in getting into the first dhyana. Basically getting into the first dhyana involves, first of all, according to the suttas, first of all, it involves seclusion. Yeah, that's the word that's used, or the translation that's used. Seclusion means not being in a secluded place so much as being secluded from the hindrances. Yeah. So in other words, it means getting into access, getting into basic presence in our experience. And then the qualities. Now, the discussion of this in Lee Brassington's book is very interesting, because a lot of our teaching in Triratna, and a lot of the teaching that Sangharakshita presented on the dhyanas, was based on the later commentaries, like the Visuddhimagga of Buddhaghosa, which was actually written about 800 years after the time of the Buddha. And by that time, things had changed quite a lot. I think what happened was that there were kind of people who were professional meditators. In the monastic sangha, there were people who were specialized in remembering and repeating the sutras, the teachings of the Buddha. And there were other people who practiced meditation and all sorts of functions within the monastic sangha. But there were, as it were, professional meditators in the monastic sangha. And it seems that what they did was they just sort of went into these dhyanas and went as far as they possibly could. Now, there's an important distinction here. I'm not quite sure whether this is entirely traditional, but I certainly find this works in my own experience. You've got two things. You've got the qualities of the dhyana itself, which I'm going to go into shortly as regards the first. And then you've got the degree of samadhi. Yeah. Now, according to Lee Brassington, what the Buddha taught, what's evident from the early Buddhist teachings, as recorded, is something which is quite embodied. That's why they're called the rupa dhyanas. That's often translated as form dhyanas, but rupa means body. And it's quite clear in the descriptions that you'll find in the Pali Canon that the Buddha is saying that you once you're in that state, so once you're in the first dhyana, then you suffuse your whole body with that quality. Yeah. So what happened was, with these, sort of very professional meditators, I'm using that term slightly figuratively, but I trust you get what I'm saying. They dialed it up. Let's say, I don't know how many of you have seen Spinal Tap, but there's a well-known thing in that film where one of the rock musicians says his amplifier goes up to 11. He says most amplifiers only go up to 10, but I've had mine made so there are 11 on the dial. So in other words, they can go louder than anybody else. Yeah. So this is what these early monastic sangha people did. They went up to 11 with samadhi. Yeah. And when you go that far into samadhi, everything apart from the object of the samadhi disappears. So There's no experience of the body. There's no experience of sounds. All of the other senses have kind of closed down, and there's just a very, very strong focus on, you know, the particular state that you're in at that time, whether it's the first dhyana, the second, or whichever. Now, that has been taken, and you know, this is what you'll find in the commentaries, which I think a lot of Sangharakshita's observations were based on. That it seems that that is where you need to get. Now, I've seen some other, some modern, you know, recent authors on dhyana kind of coming from this perspective and saying that, I mean, I think one of them was even saying, even to get into access, you'll need to practice either, you know, a 4 to 6 month retreat, or at least 10,000 hours of meditation to get into access. Yeah. So from that perspective, you know, well, I have to say it would be more or less impossible unless you are literally a full-time meditator devoted, you know, exclusively to dhyana. Yeah. I would also dispute whether it's necessary or even helpful to, you know, get into that extreme of samadhi around any of the dhyanas. You know, it doesn't seem to be what the Buddha was pointing to, you know, because it's quite clear that the body is experienced in the rupa dhyanas. Yeah. So we can kind of, well, we can kind of ignore that sort of advice if we come across it. Yeah. Now, there's another perspective which I found really useful, and this relates to, you know, how far you turn up the dial. Daniel Ingram, and I believe this came from his teacher, who was I forget his name. Anyway, he had a teacher. They were both Americans, and I think his teacher came up with the idea of, he used the terms from soft to hard dhyana. Yeah. So soft dhyana, which I sometimes refer to as light dhyana, you know, which is maybe a bit more descriptive, from light to heavy dhyana, as it were, but it doesn't matter. It's the same idea. So soft dhyana is where the basic qualities of the dhyana factors are there, but you don't remain in it for very long necessarily, you know, because the samadhi is quite low. Yeah, so you would kind of enter into that just when you've cultivated some access. So the amount of samadhi is quite low. It's sufficient to experience the qualities of the dhyana, but it's unlikely it would last very long. And in fact, with regard to soft dhyana, you can quite easily, once you've identified the qualities of each of the dhyanas, you know, the first 4 or even all 8 of them, you can move up and down through them quite readily. You know, so you can find a kind of pliancy of mind around that and move through the dhyanas. Yeah, and you don't stay for very long in any one of them. So another teacher from that kind of that group of teachers has given the example of, imagine a rainbow with 8 bands of color. Yeah, and it's like, you could move through the rainbow. You could move up and down quite readily. That would be the equivalent of soft dhyana, where you don't stay for very long in any particular dhyana. Whereas hard dhyana would be like you just immerse yourself completely in red, or whichever color it might be. You just completely immerse yourself in one color. Yeah. So by immersing yourself, you strengthen the quality of samadhi, and you kind of dial up. And I would say a sensible level would be around 5, certainly not 11. Yeah, so around 5 or 6, which you could expect to get to on a retreat. Yeah, or maybe 4 would be enough. Don't take this too literally. I'm just kind of trying to give you a general sense of an overview of this. But I think even on a event like this, a weekend, even online, it can be possible to get to 1 or 2 with with the level of samadhi, and to recognize the in experience, the presence of the factors of, well, I mean, we'll see how far it can go, but potentially the first and second, potentially the third, who knows, even the fourth. That may sound quite unlikely, but it is actually, well, let's just say not impossible at all. But certainly we're just going to focus on the first one now. So the qualities described in the Pali Canon are, first of all, as I mentioned, seclusion. So first of all, you have to be out of the hindrances. Yeah. And then the next are Vitakka Vichara. Now, again, I think we've inherited a not terribly useful translation from Sangharakshita. I think he mainly refers to it as initial and sustained thought. And again, he was just depending on the sources that he had at the time. But Vitakka Vichara, according to, Lee Brassington's done some research on this, and according to him, at the time of the Buddha, Vitakka Vichara simply meant thinking. In other words, in the first dhyana, there is thinking going on, there is mental activity going on. In a way, Vitakka Vichara just means thinking and more thinking. It's just a way of emphasizing the word rather than having two separate qualities. So it's definitely not the initial and sustained thought is kind of part of the experience of dhyana. It doesn't involve thinking. Dhyana is a fully, well, I would go as far as to say it's a fully somatic experience. It doesn't involve the thinking mind, but the thinking is going on there in the background. So just as this morning I had birdsong going on. They've stopped it now. I've got rain going on instead. So I can hear the rain, but I don't have to focus on it. So in other words, once you're in access, you should find that the thoughts are quite in the background, and it's almost like it's just a sound going on. In fact, you can have the sense that it's not you thinking at all. It's just thoughts are happening in the background, you could say. So that's Vitakka Vichara. It's just in the background, but it is a factor of the first dhyana because thought is there. And of course that applies actually in soft dhyana. Thought can be there throughout all of them, which is something also worth bearing in mind. Then the next one, which is really important, is piti or priti. So piti is, you could say it's energy. It's sometimes called rapture, but it's more kind of, it can be rapture. It can be extremely rapturous. So I hear. Can't say that's often my experience. But it's more like a kind of a welling up of energy, a strong welling up of energy. And that wells up in dependence on focusing on pleasure. And that's why we're going in that direction. So the important thing is to find pleasure anywhere in your body or anywhere in your experience and focus on that. And if you're not finding it already there, so to speak, just somatically, you're at the point when you're in access. Another thing you can do, I've been bringing in that little opening to metta at the beginning. So if you get to that point in your practice, you're in access and you're not finding any pleasure, open up to metta. Just open the heart and open up to a quality of kindness, love, well-wishing, goodwill, whatever way in which you can open up to metta quite directly. And bear in mind what I said about the fact that our practicing meditation, our practicing the Dharma is already an act of kindness. Whatever aspect of the Dharma we're engaging with, it's an act of kindness and compassion. So it's like that is there, it's already there in our being when we're practicing. And I'm suggesting that from access, you can open to it directly. You don't need to, do may you be happy, or may I be happy, may I be well, or imagine things. I mean, you can do those, they might be helpful, but what I'm suggesting is that you try and open to the heart and that heart quality directly and just let it be there. So you're sitting in a kind of atmosphere of kindness towards yourself and your experience. Yeah. Now, if you do that, you'll probably find that quite likely the heart center will become activated, and there could well be some very pleasant feelings around here. Yeah. So another thing which I found is if I actually do this as part of a Qigong practice I do, but if you just rub the heart, in either direction and feel into it, that can also sort of begin to activate the heart center and give a sense of pleasure arising there. So I'm not necessarily suggesting you do that during the meditation, but it might be just a way of coming into contact with the heart center. And if the metta becomes strong, there'll definitely be pleasure there. So that's what you would focus on in order to get into the first dhyana. But you can also use metta itself rather than mindfulness of the breathing as a way into the first dhyana and the other ones. So bear that in mind. I mean, maybe if we have time tomorrow, for instance, we might use metta as a way into dhyana and see how that works. It might work better for some people. Okay, so that's priti or piti, energy or rapture. Yeah. So it can also be a strong upwelling of energy, and people who've had experience of Kundalini energy or have done the practice called Tummo, where I practice concerning the central channel in Tibetan Buddhism. It seems that the energy they're describing also is another way of talking about priti or piti. So it's a natural energy that we can open up to, and it will appear, so to speak, of itself if we focus on the sense of pleasure. Yeah. And the other one is sukha. Sukha is pleasure. Yeah. And happiness. Yeah. So again, I found that once you're with the sense of the pleasant sensations, I found that if I just bring in a sense of happiness. Now, a hint which I find helpful at that point is to have a secret smile. Yeah. So, I mean, some people would say an overt smile. Lee Pressington does, but I would say a secret smile. It's like an inner smile. And somehow that can make a difference. You can experiment with that. So just a sense of inner happiness, and those two together can spark off the full experience of the first dhyana. Yeah. And initially, you may find that the priti is just located in one area of the body. So as soon as you find the priti really taking off, then you just focus on that area of the body. Eventually, you can let it suffuse. If you're there for long enough, and if your samadhi is strong enough, you can let it suffuse the whole body. But initially, at least, just focus on the priti wherever it is. It could literally, in a way, be anywhere in the body. So it'll be pretty clear when it has arisen. Okay, so any questions around any of that?
I've got a question, Tejananda, about priti.
Yeah.
So I think it's also been suggested that priti arises out of the result of the resolution of kind of inner conflicts and blockages.
Mm.
Is that kind of? I'm pretty sure I've heard that somewhere, and it would seem to be consistent with my experience. Is that something that you think is that a big part of what priti is?
Well, it's definitely an aspect of Preeti.
Yeah.
I'm sure Sangharsh has made that observation.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it might be that, if there has been, well, I mean, I would say experientially, it is true. When there's the resolution of let's say a contraction or something that's held, there's a sense of release, and that release can be accompanied by Preeti. But that's not particularly what we're looking for when we're cultivating the first dhyana. Yeah, I mean, it might happen. I think by being in dhyana, I think that's partly why Sangharsh includes it in the area of integration.
Yeah.
Because it's like psychic contents, psychological contents can be resolved, and that in itself could give rise to Preeti. But it's like once that resolution has taken place, you're not going to get back into the dhyana, the first dhyana, the same way again, because that one's been resolved.
Yeah, so I just wondered whether Preeti might diminish over time because things kind of bits of the conflict and inner blockages get progressively resolved.
That's right. Yeah. 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 It does.
Yeah. It's been. I'm not sort of saying I'm massively integrated necessarily, but it does feel like it's the tendency towards that kind of physical rapture has diminished over time, and I feel like I've probably kind of worked through some sort of deeper blockages.
Yeah.
Conflicts. So it may be whatever the Preeti that comes up is somehow kind of more subtle.
That's right.
And I remember Vajrananda saying as well, I think it was Vajrananda who said that, years ago that some people have a greater capacity for Preeti than others anyway.
Yeah. Well, absolutely. I mean, we're all different, sort of physically and psychically. So, yeah. But I mean, if I find that, or I found that Preeti did tend to become less and less experienced, and Sukha became more to the fore. So, which meant that the second dhyana was actually more accessible than the first one. Yeah, if you see that this as Preeti as being the main aspect of the first one, then the second one can seem to be more available, which is more about Sukha. And Preeti starts to go into the background. So, any other questions or observations?
Can I ask a question?
Yes.
Yeah. I was going to ask this morning actually, but I felt a bit self-conscious. But now you're talking about Preeti. But I had quite. I was on a meditation retreat last week with Vajra Devi, so I've been doing a lot of meditation. So this morning, I have, and I've been having it for a long time actually. I have these sort of, it's like static, and it moves up my arms across my body, and so a whole of my upper body, like is tingling, and then it usually dissipates. But today it went down into my legs and my whole body.
Yeah.
So it's, I've always thought of that as being Preeti, but I'm not sure that it is. But this morning it was just like non-stop. It would dissipate, but then it would come back again, and I had almost like an aversion to it because I felt like go away.
Well, obviously I'm only kind of getting to some extent here, but it sounds like it's a movement of somatic energy within the body. And I think it's perfectly natural, and you probably can't make it go away, because it's just part of being alive. Yeah. So when you become attuned to the soma, and you're fully present in it, then you start to notice that it does kind of morph in a way, and that's just our experience. We are. I sometimes use the analogy of the idea of a somatic cloud. It's like we're a cloud of sensations, and if you imagine the sensations as like droplets in a cloud, and within a cloud, the droplets are moving. The cloud is not something static and fixed, and it's like that with our body, with our direct experience of the soma. It's just moving energy, and the more aware you are of it, which certainly you do become when you've been doing quite a lot of meditation. The more you just notice that that's what's going on. So all that's happening is that stuff you've probably spent most of your life not noticing, you're now noticing.
So it's not pretty then?
Probably not. But I mean, I wouldn't make such a clear distinction, because I think these somatic sensations are, if you like, I see them as a very low level priti. Yeah, and you once you notice it, you can tune into it at any time. Yeah, but with the first dhyana proper, they do, they would become stronger, and they're, usually, especially if you're, if you haven't been doing it for that long, you would have quite an eruption of priti, and it would be very, very clear that it's stronger than just the body sensations.
It doesn't just feel like body sensations, it feels like static electricity shocks moving up my body. So moving up my arms and across. So it's not just a feel in my body, it is a like static electricity. Yeah,
well, I mean, that explains pretty well what I'm talking about. It's like, our experience of the body is, I use the word tingles, but you can imagine, like that if you've ever touched a mild electric current, you get, quite tingly sensations coming through. Yeah, so it's like that, and that is the inner experience of the body.
Thank you.
Anybody else?
Yeah, Tejananda. When we were discussing pleasure to arise, so I don't know how much thought and how much feeling was going on, but it was actually excitement, which I just presume was not helpful.
Well, it could be, if it's mental excitement, that might not be helpful, but if you feel a sense of excitement in the body, or something that you could label as excitement, that could be priti.
Okay.
Yeah. So
something to work with.
Well, yeah, just make that distinction. Is this just mental excitement, and the mind is sort of buzzing, as it were, or is it a sense of energetic excitement?
Okay.
Because that would be another way of talking about priti.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
Okay. Anyone else? Okay, well, maybe it's time for a bit of practice then.
Actually, Tejananda. Sorry, could I come in? I just couldn't quite.
Oh yeah.
Couldn't find myself on the little list of boxes to unmute. So it was just this morning when with the pleasure. So I had quite a lot of unpleasant sensations in my physical body.
Yeah.
And also when I just checked the sort of mood of the mind, if you like, that wasn't a particular source of pleasure either. But what was pleasant was, and I sort of was first directed to this by Analia, and I've used it quite regularly, is the pleasure of the present moment, the pleasure in the present moment. So I just wondered if you had thoughts about that in relation to the cultivation of jhana, whether it specifically needs to be a physical sort of located source of pleasure, or whether that sense of the pleasure from the mind in the broader sense in the present moment.
No, I think it's any source of pleasure, actually. Well, wholesome pleasure, let's say. So I mean, the present moment is, so to speak, a great place to be.
Yes,
It's where we really are, and that's why it feels pleasant. So I think from there you can probably you use the pleasure as the the way into first dhyana.
Give it a go.
Just check it and see, as they say.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay. Okay, so I've muted you all now. So let's do a practice. So just settle into your basic comfortable posture. And just sit there noticing states of mind and body right now. And then bringing awareness to the sensations of contact with the seat and floor. And getting a sense of a grounded and stable base, and of contact with the earth through the floor, through the gravitational force. You could also have a sense of awareness opening down into the earth, either directly or imaginatively. And then if you wish, you can use a few breaths up from the earth to bring lift and energy into the body. Having a sense of the energy rising towards the spine, towards the back of the body, right up to the top of the head, and even beyond. Let the breathing become natural again. Check for alignment around the orientation of the chin and poise. And then scan through from the head downwards, just noticing and discovering to what extent you can let go of any contractions and holdings. And then just letting the awareness take in the whole breathing body, whole cloud of body sensations. And discern directly whether you can just stay with the sense of the whole breathing body, or whether you need a closer focus, whether you need counting or some other support. And allow the body, allow the awareness to find the optimum place to rest the awareness. It could be the whole, it could be just one area of the body and the breathing. So presence of awareness in those sensations, rather than being aware of those sensations from some kind of external vantage point. Inhabit your body, inhabit the breath, inhabit the sensations. And dull the effort down until it's just sufficient to maintain the focus and not drop into hindrances, but just as little of effort as you can possibly use. If hindrances are present, then recollect the direct ways of working on them that I mentioned this morning. And if the mind is settled, if the hindrances are settled, then let the awareness start looking for pleasure. And it also may be helpful at this point to remember the inner smile, the secret smile, or even a slightly overt one. And just notice whether that does help produce a sense of pleasure or happiness. So whatever I'm saying, it may or may not correspond with where you are in your practice. So always be where you are rather than where I'm necessarily pointing. If you are in access and there is pleasure, then focus on the quality of pleasure itself. Let that become your focus, irrespective of what's giving rise to the pleasure. You may find it in these very subtle somatic tingles. They can seem neutral, but if you regard them as being a sense of aliveness, you can begin to get a sense of pleasure around those sometimes. Simultaneously with whatever sense of pleasure you're aware of and focusing on, open to a sense of happiness. There's a very direct sense of being happy to be alive, to be this aliveness, to be this awareness. So most of your awareness is with the pleasure and sense of happiness. And there's just a background awareness of the mind, whatever the mind is up to, and the other sense fields. They're there, but they're peripheral. And then let go of making any effort at all. Okay, we'll just have a 5-minute break. That last practice or stuff that happened during that last practice. Did anything happen?
I wanted to share something, Tejananda.
Yeah.
Yeah, I just love being told that I don't have to do anything. And then I just find it really easy to experience pleasure then when it's like I was saying earlier on about that naturalness. And I found the discussion before the meditation, I think, created quite a lot of tension in me because I don't really understand what's going on in the terms that we're discussing. And then so I was kind of trying to work with that, just finding a naturalness, knowing that I didn't understand the terms. Again, like at the end, as soon as you said, okay, drop it now, drop any trying, then a lot of pleasure came back, and like myself again, something about being allowed to be myself and not discussing things in language which is hard for me to understand. So go back to that naturalness, that sort of sense that, okay, in the body we know how to move, in the body we know how to access pleasure. And we need people, our kind of community and our friends, to just remind us that we know how to do that, and we know when we need to tell ourselves that we know how to do that already, almost.
Well, that's right. I mean, we do. It's like, as I said earlier, the body knows, the mind knows, awareness knows. You could say all of those, if we can just let them be what they are, that is enough. Of course, our issue is around the fact that we can't always let them be just what they are. So sometimes, just reminding yourself, just be natural, just be what I am. And let the mind, by doing that and being in the body, being embodied, the mind naturally quietens of itself. So it's like there is a feeling, I think, that somehow you have to engage and grapple with the mind. But you don't. You can just leave it alone.
No, that's right. And there's the creativity that naturally arises from being okay with our naturalness. Well,
there's nothing more okay than being with our naturalness.
Thank you.
Good. Okay. Anyone else have anything?
Yeah, when I've Tejananda, when I've done some of this before, I've been sometimes a bit overwhelmed with some sexual feelings, which I've sort of been a bit unsure about, and that's quite interesting to share. But what I did this time, which was really lovely, was I just sat with that in a more gentle way, and I realised I just got very in touch with the sort of pleasure right through my whole torso, actually, completely away from my head, which is the thing I do find difficult to do. And I just really enjoyed being in that in a very gentle sense, actually, and that was really, really helpful. And similarly, like others are saying, and then I actually, when I let go again right near the end, I just got yet more pleasure, really, and sort of tingling, but a different kind of tingling. That's what I've been playing with previously in my meditation, wondering what it was,
Right.
Interesting to hear others talk about pretty, what's tingling, what's pleasure. It's just very curious. So, they're all very interconnected, and so I just really enjoyed just sitting and being curious with that and enjoying what it was without labeling it, really.
That's great. I think that's a really important point about not feeling the need to label it, or even avoiding labeling it and just letting it be what it is. And again, it's known directly. It doesn't need to be labeled. The mind is just so insistent on it, in its belief that everything has to be labeled. But that's impossible. The mind can't label everything that we experience, and it's deluded anyway.
Yes.
So I mean, just explore. I mean, I think that's really what it's all about. I mean, not just this, as ways into Dhyana, but the whole of our Dharma practice is about being open and exploring, and experimenting, and seeing what, where it leads us. When it leads us, in a sense, to a dead end. When it leads us to something new opening up. All of this we can explore. Somebody else was just trying to, was it Angie? Yeah.
Yes, thank you, Tejananda. I just want to say that I'm experiencing pleasure because I actually did find the pleasure, which I haven't before. So it started as tingling in my hands, and if I was the only place I could find pleasure, but if I focused on that, then I noticed it started to, yeah, I think as somebody before had just said, to sort of suffuse through my torso. That was it, but my pleasure is actually having experienced it.
Yeah. That's great. Yeah. So that I mentioned it during the lead through, but that sense of the body as a field of tingles, basically, or you could say vibrations, but it's like it is a very direct sense of aliveness, and in itself, I mean, it's there all the time. We can always notice it. If a lot of the time we don't because we're caught up in other things, but it's always there to come back to once you've begun to notice it. And the more you come into the body, the more it kind of fills out, and becomes more vivid. And then, rather than perceiving it as, or regarding it as kind of just neutral little tingles, if you start to regard it as, oh, could this actually be pleasant? Because it is a sense of being alive. And it's all, it's also what related to what Vajradevi said about the present moment. It's just like, well, the present moment is our aliveness. That's another way of talking about it. So it's just like you can find pleasure there where before it seemed to be neutral. And once that pleasure is recognized, then it can become, well, it can increase, and it becomes your object. Sometimes it's so subtle that you can't stay with it. In other words, you lose the samadhi. So that's something to watch out for. You kind of move from, say, the breathing into the pleasure, and then suddenly you find that you're back in the thinking. So it's because maybe you haven't spent quite enough time just sort of setting up enough samadhi. So you would then need to go back to the breath and just recultivate the samadhi a bit more. But actually, once you're aware of the pleasure, it can also feed into the samadhi. So you build up a kind of feedback loop, and the samadhi can increase. Okay. Guess we better do another practice. Oh, Lotus. Yeah.
I would like to say I was actually feeling quite a lot of tiredness and this sloth and stupor as we call it. And I tried to be aware of my body, and I was actually having quite a lot of uncomfortable feelings in my body, really, or this tingling. But then and a slight headache also. But actually, I just started to feel it, like not labeling it as unpleasant.
Yeah.
But actually just staying with it, and this is just as it is right now. And then it was actually much better. I felt much more present, and I could just be with my breath in the middle of it all.
Right.
But to me, it actually helps quite a lot that when you talked about this of bringing metta in. Because I always found the Triratna way of meditating as a little bit squarish. Perhaps that we have the metta bhavana, and then we have the mindfulness of breathing. And I always, I come from a Tibetan tradition where it was much more kind of elaborate and mixed. And so I could feel anyway that when you talked about bringing in metta or opening for that, that also helps a lot.
Good. Yeah. Well, I mean, I do think that. Well, I don't think my way of practicing, presenting the way in which we meditate in Triratna is very much integrating those qualities together. So it's like the body awareness, the somatic awareness, the metta, all of those aspects, they come together. And you can sort of then move into any of them as appropriate at any time during any practice, actually. So it's just like, again, be open and explore, and you may find it goes somewhere that it didn't go before. Yeah. Okay. And Lotus, did you still want to say something?
Yes. First of all, thank you. It's really good for me to follow your guidance.
Good.
It's very helpful for me. It makes it very clear for me which way to go. There's a path I follow.
Right.
Yeah, that's really great. And the other thing is that now when we work with this stage, the first dhyana, I also began to see light, purple light. But you didn't talk about that in relation to the first dhyana.
Yeah. What did you? I didn't catch the words. You said something light.
Light. I
White
see
light?
Purple light. Doing like this. Pulsating.
Okay. Yeah. Well, that's a sign.
That's a side.
Yeah, that's a sign that you're getting into absorption. Yeah. So it's quite common seeing light. It's called a nimitta, which means sign. And another nice thing that I got from Lee Brassington, he says, it's like, when you see a sign, just, okay, it's a sign, and you can carry on. That's all. It's like if you're driving into a town and you see the sign of the town, saying Shrewsbury, you don't get out of your car, pick up the sign and put it in the trunk. you just pass it on. So these are signs that we're getting more absorbed. Yeah, and it's a good sign.
That is a good sign.
It is a good sign, yeah.
Okay, good.
But it's not a good sign if you pick it up and carry it along with you, that sort of thing.
No.
In other words, oh, I've got lights going on. Oh, isn't this exciting? Then you just suddenly find yourself back in proliferation.
Yeah. No, but actually, I just observe it, and it often comes at some point. So. Yeah.
Well, that's great. And I'd also say that some people get it and others don't. So if you don't get that sort of thing going on, the rest of you, that's fine too. You can still become absorbed, but you don't necessarily get these kind of lights or other. I've never really had them.
No.
No,
but there's just something with the purple. It's mostly purple for me. I don't know why. I have no.
I don't. You'll never know why.
No, I don't know. Yeah.
Okay. Good. Well, anyway, let's do another practice.
Yeah. Thank you.
So just sit. And you can start by not making any effort at all. You're just sitting here, noticing what's going on. And anything can be happening. And then checking in on the sensations of grounding, getting the sense of lift. Aligning the head so it's effortlessly floating above the shoulders, so to speak. And checking that the body is poised, balanced. Letting go of holdings, contractions. And letting the awareness fill the whole cloud of sensations of the body, including the breathing. Now, where are you in terms of, are you in proliferation, hindrances? Are you in access? Probably as we've just restarted, you'll need to build up the samadhi a bit more if you are already in access. And obviously, if you're not, then you need to discern where it's best to focus and let the body find that, let the awareness find that. Remember that samadhi is basically, in this context, the capacity to stay within the object, for awareness to remain within the object, within the focus. I'll just mention this from my own experience, that I'm noticing that my awareness wants to go into the heart and metta rather than the sensations of the breathing. So if something like that arises, go with it, see where it takes you. Metta is an embodied state. It's not just a mental state. So you can be present in metta and in the body. However, do whatever seems most relevant to your own state right now. So if there's a certain steadiness of samadhi over a few minutes, then look for the pleasure. And the pleasure itself becomes the object, the focus. Let the pleasure be infused with a sense of happiness. relax. As little effort as possible. Contact the inner smile. If you're finding that there's not much happening on the priti front, maybe give more awareness to the sense of happiness, kind of contented happiness. And this contented happiness is still very embodied. It's more subtle than pretty. Also look for a sense of the awareness rather than being focused. Becomes much more sort of spacious, along with the sense of happiness. completely drop any effort making. Okay, so I dropped in a few little hints there, which could have potentially taken you into second or third dhyana. Now, I think the tradition seems to suggest that you have to go 1, and then 2, and then 3, and then 4, and so on. And yeah, in a way you do, but it's not like you have to sort of take up residence in any of them. Yeah, so I'm talking about soft dhyana here. And as I said, soft dhyana can be quite flexible and move between. The main the main initial challenge is to recognize the qualities of the different dhyanas, the factors, as they're called. And with the first one, as I indicated, you may find that priti doesn't really take off. There's pleasure, but it doesn't really become strong. It certainly doesn't become rapture. Actually, rapture can be, for some people, it can be too much of a good thing, in the sense that, I hear that people can even sort of have quite, be locked into rapture. Lee Brassington said that, it's very rare, but, he's known of somebody to be locked into rapture for about a year, which, that's not something you really want to be happening. It's just like with the dhyanas, rapture is a comparatively energetically coarse state, dhyanically speaking. So what you do from there is that you tone down the rapture, and if it hasn't really developed in the first place, you just bump up the, so to speak, you bump up the sense of happiness. And so the sense of happiness is the quality which characterizes the second dhyana more strongly. So the priti goes into the background and the sense of happiness comes more into the foreground. They're still both there. So you may have found that something can happen around that. And it may be even that it's like the sense of priti drops away altogether. Even the sense of pleasure, and there's just a sense of happiness, which becomes, at that point, it becomes quite spacious. Yeah. So any of these things can happen. You can move through those states pretty quickly, even more quickly than you can really recognize them. Before I started saying all that, I just suddenly found that I was almost certainly in the fourth dhyana. which is characterized by a sense of peace, among other things, or sort of equanimity, but more peace. So if you're aware of the qualities that you're looking for, you can sort of begin to navigate the territory. So I'm just putting that out there as something to inform your practice. I don't know what was happening for any of you individually, because I haven't asked you yet. So now I'm asking you, would anyone like to say anything or make any observations or ask questions?
Tejananda?
Hello.
Sila. Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned contentedness. I think it's such an important word, and spaciousness for me. And in fact, I realized how much more enjoyable than they are, than enjoyable in the widest sense of the word, than the pretty, really, which I don't tend these days to get very much. But that was lovely feeling, and it has a sort of the feeling of sukha has quite a feeling of longevity, as if you could just stay in it. I mean, I know you can't, but you could just stay there for really quite a long time.
Yeah.
And I remember Daniel Ingram's thing from years and years ago, reading it, and I remembered it suddenly, is that idea, he had an idea of a sort of donut effect, whereas with Priti, you're more concentrated in the middle. And then as you get further into the dhyanas, you get more into the edges, your peripheral, you get wider and wider peripheral, you just sink into a wider state.
Yes.
And I noticed the thinking, it's not like it's, as you said yourself earlier, it's not like it's gone completely, but I just get fragmentary words then. Sometimes describing the state or yes, contentedness, I said, I realized I said to myself. But it's now not really proper conversation, so to speak. Yeah, not proper sentences.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, that figures with my experience too. Great.
So I had a very sort of deep sense of kind of happiness and contentment, and accompanied by a very kind of like thought was sort of vestigially present, but kind of like very soft skeins of thought, a bit like little bits of spider's web. But what I did notice at one point was that the thought started to coalesce a little bit, and there was a thought that came up about something in the news. And I noticed a change in my kind of energetic state. The energy suddenly, it developed a kind of coarser edge. Sort of gathered around that thought, and I noticed it was like, and I sort of, it was like engaged with that thought, and but sort of tipping a bit towards kind of a slightly more ebullient energy, as opposed to the soft and kind of more, the more settled energy of sukha, which is what I took it to be.
Right.
So that was it was just interesting to notice the sort of very subtle fluctuation in the energy experience that came with that.
Yeah. Well, it's great when you get to the point where you can notice, just the nature of a thought that comes in and the effect that it has, but it doesn't necessarily knock you out of out of the dhyana.
No.
It can still be sustained, or it can be restored if it has gone a bit wonky.
Yeah.
Good. Anyone else?
I would like to share into it. I found for me, I guess, also working into it more and staying with it more, it was a very different experience this time than the meditation we had just before now. It was easier to follow and have a concentration. And one thing that was quite interesting for me was when getting in touch with a subtle sense of pleasure and also the happiness, and then an expectation, which I guess has to do with how much effort is there, an expectation for it to grow, or an expectation for it to to grow. I think
more than just staying with it. And how when I tried to play with letting go of that, it actually was doing the opposite. Then it was not growing, but I could rest in it even more, and just playing back and forth in that somehow.
Sure.
In a subtle way, it was all very subtle, but it was interesting to just notice the expectancy of something arising and how that affects the whole thing.
Yeah. Well, that's a good thing to observe. Because I mean, getting into expectation is basically getting into desire. So you're heading back into the hindrances, really. It's just like, as you said, just, okay, this is what's going on, and that's where you need to be, rather than kind of projecting ahead of yourself, so to speak.
Yeah. Can that also have to do with, or I felt I was connecting almost to a memory of how previous experience, or that previous experience also creates an idea of how it should be, or?
Yeah, well, that can be. I mean, that can work positively or negatively, in the sense that, it can be that memory can set up an expectation. But if it's more like a body memory, so to speak, or a somatic memory, it can actually open you out, okay, that happened. Oh, it's happening now. Yeah. Anybody else?
Okay, I could say something. Svajra Priya. So you were talking about settling into those somatic field, and then when that feels more stable, then if you like, open up the awareness to notice the sensations of pleasure more broadly. And what I notice is that I'm not very interested, or I find it harder to stay simply with the sensations of the somatic field, but I'm much more interested in the pleasurable qualities of those. So it's not as if I'm making pleasure the object, but somehow noticing the pleasurable aspect. Makes them more absorbing. So that's the kind of the edge I was playing with there.
Yeah, well, quite. So once you've noticed that, then the pleasure is available as the object, and you're kind of there with the pleasure. But as I said before, the pleasure can be quite subtle, and at first also it can seem, oh, I can't really find it. Oh, it's gone. Oh, it's back. So it's just like finding the pleasure can be quite a task. But once it's identified, usually if you can just let the awareness gently rest in it, then it begins to become a more stable object, and you can, well, then it proceeds.
And equally, when you invited the observation of spaciousness, then like Sila Bodhi, I found that was again more interesting.
Right.
So I find that in a way, the narrower, more sensate the experience, sensate, I don't know if that's the right word, but the more focused I am, the less interesting I find it, or the more strain there is. Open I can allow the awareness to be and notice the qualities of spaciousness, and that tends to attract my interest more.
Yeah, that's right. It's at that point when the spaciousness begins to emerge. Somehow the whole thing becomes much more spacious, and it's like somehow you're more there, just in that. So I think that's a valuable thing to look for, almost at any point. Is there spaciousness here? Because again, it's one of the reasons why I'm not too happy with the word concentration, because it kind of suggests a narrowness and a coming together. And that focus, which is my preferred word, it has its place, obviously, but it's also, if you think of it in terms of the dhyanas are concentrations, you can miss completely the fact that they are actually increasingly spacious. And you know, that's even with the Rupa dhyanas, not to speak of the formless ones, which we will be exploring tomorrow.
Can I say something?
Annie?
Yeah, I really loved, I'm not sure what happened and when it happened in terms of all the different terms that we're using, but something happened as that meditation went on where there was a sense of familiarity, and it was a softening, and it was an inward one that I felt glad to be there. And with that came a confidence and awareness.
Right.
The rain and your voice, or whatever it was through the senses that was coming, it held in that familiar, confident, golden warmness. Can't really fit the words pretty, samadhi, and these other terms too. And when I stopped trying to look for my experience to be fit into those terms, that, and you said again, it was that spaciousness, that something there.
Yeah.
That I had that familiarity, and perhaps it's to do with, and I don't know if it's a body memory kind of thing, that I just felt really comfortable and familiar with, and to be with, and stop striving for something that was outside of my experience.
Yeah, great. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's fine. That's perfect. And I mean, I know some people find the Sanskrit a bit kind of off-putting, or the Pali, and others don't. Yeah, so I'm speaking to the Pali files and the Pali phobes as well. But yeah, I mean, in a sense, that the plain English can get at it. You know, it's just like, well, spaciousness, pleasure, you know, energy, you know, sort of aliveness. All of these words are very relevant, and you know, much more sort of speak much more directly to English speakers. So yeah, just listen to the ones that you find helpful.
Andy, I feel like I have very little control over in the process. What actually sort of nudged me towards pretty and some sort of absorbed happiness at time was you said if you're not finding with the breath, look to metta, look to your heart center, and just by coincidence, that's exactly what I'd done, and I just felt this smile coming on my face at just the coincidence of these two random events, and that's actually what nudged me over. So it wasn't anything I found; it was just absolutely happened. And that's been very much my experience with these rare occasions that I've experienced dhyana before. It just happens.
Great, yeah. Good to
hear. Hello. Yes, I wanted to add something to that, because it's just that what I've been concerned with, I think, is the movement from one state of mind to another. And so you start today, I started today, as probably quite a few days lately, in a difficult state of mind.
Yeah.
And I'm aiming to get somewhere and learning to deal with this in the particular circumstances we are in at the moment.
Yeah.
And so I suppose you can't guarantee to get there. And I've enjoyed the sense of adventure, which took me by surprise when I could have the inner smile. But then I really more or less sort of, I could feel it turning into a not smile. I mean, I have to, and then I was, you know, the sort of extra breath or the extra, I was interested then when that happened, whether it's the extra energy and change in posture that will perhaps bring you further along the line to, or not along the line, but into the space. That people are talking about. But I took a long time to get there. I don't know how long I'll take next. You know, I'm just interested, really.
Yeah, well, don't worry about it. I mean, you know, the thing is to just make the most of what you've got right here, right now. Yeah, and there's always more available than you at first think there is. Yeah, so just sort of, okay, this is what's here, let's make the most of that.
But there's quite a lot of alarm and other things which are the distraction, the hindrances.
Yeah,
and that takes time.
It does. Yeah.
Is that right? Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. I mean, it's like, with Dhyana, once you get through to the point of access, basically all of those mental concerns are, they've just gone to one side, so to speak, for now. They haven't gone away. They will come back, but from access onwards, they're not affecting you. But at the same time, at any point in our practice, we can find that disturbing emotions do come up. Yeah, and it's like, well, the question is, how do we deal with those? Yeah, so if disturbing emotions come up and they're so disturbing that we can't kind of do anything else, then it's better just to go into that. I mean, that's a whole area of stuff that we can't go into now. Maybe we could touch on it more tomorrow. But it's just like, if we can really go into our somatic experience of that disturbance, we can find its essence, and actually by going into it, we can release it.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. So that's the whole thing. I mean, I'm only giving you a very slight sense of it there, what I'm saying. Okay. Anybody else? Oh, who's that? Oh,
Sandra.
Yeah.
Yes, you've just touched on something that I was going to bring up. There's the forward movement, the grasping, and the reverse movement, so I was feeling negative towards practicing, you've been talking about staying with things, so I stayed with that negativity, and it lasted a little while, but it was a bit like when you're told to drive into a skid and you come out.
Yeah.
And so then I just came out into a much more positive state.
Great. Yeah, that's a very good example. Nice metaphor as well. Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, it's like when something's going on emotionally, what we call a negative emotion, there's a thinking aspect and a body aspect. And we usually think of the body aspect as the emotion, but it's not, it's both together. So if you can really come into the body aspect and really, really inhabit that, it's then that it begins to transform. Yeah. Whereas if you keep the mental and the body aspect both going, then it just remains or increases. So that both together is what we call a samskara. Samskara means making together. We bring these two things together, and we make a negative emotion, or it can be a positive emotion too, but in this case it's a negative one. So yeah, good example.
Roger again, Tejananda.
Okay.
So we've been talking a lot about embodiment and pleasure and happiness and so forth in meditation. But I wonder if you had anything to say about cultivating and sustaining those qualities outside meditation. It seems to me that there's an important kind of continuity that you want to try to establish. So have you got any thoughts about that?
Yeah, well, I think the most valuable thing you can cultivate, in a sense, with regard to the world and others, is a sense of, first of all, of presence in your being, so to speak, and a sense of equanimity. Yeah, and you can find that equanimity in awareness. Yeah, it's just like awareness itself. If you can just get a sense of awareness being here, its nature is equanimous. It's not reacting to anything. It's just allowing whatever happens. So if you've got a sense of even I am that awareness rather than I am all this stuff going on in awareness, that can give rise to a degree of equanimity which you can actually live from. Not right away, but once that is more fully embodied, then you can live for that more. But with dhyanas, there are particular qualities which are transient. And actually one of the things which Lee Brastington recommends that you do at the end of a dhyana practice is reflect on the impermanence of the dhyana. Yeah, so the dhyana factors drop away. But a sense of equanimity, a sense of openness, a sense of presence, all of those are actually available all the time. Yeah, so those are qualities which we can bring into everyday life. But they too, our awareness of being those qualities needs to be developed. But the qualities are there all the time.
And I guess you would say that would start with embodiment. So
yeah,
being as embodied as possible in daily life.
Well, yeah. Just sort of, if you can be present in the body as the body, if you inhabit the body, then you're inhabiting your own being, and from your own being, you can open to other people's being. Yeah. Whereas what we tend to do is we just sort of project out onto our energy goes out onto the other person, and we try and inhabit the other person, so to speak. But if we're inhabiting our own space, then we can just receive others and situations with a great deal more kind of equanimity, among other things, and responsiveness.
I thought of it like an appreciation practice. So it's there, the joy and the happiness and the appreciation and the connectedness is there. It's kind of good to keep reminding ourselves. So to bring, if I could bring that into my daily life, to be aware that pleasure is there already, but just to keep reminding myself.
Well, it's available. You can locate it, but in everyday life, you cannot. I find I can't always access it, whereas I can always access a sense of awareness and a sense of being here, embodied in this, which is just this body, this cloud of sensations, and from there, I can open or access those other qualities, which are more kind of qualities which can arise and pass. But you're right, they are actually always potentially available.
It's almost just making time to look at them it's almost like making time to look at them.
Yeah.
Time to just be with the good bits.
Yeah. Well, a lot of the time we're actually, we're doing our best to avoid them by going somewhere else. Yeah, we're engaging in avoiding stratagems, even avoiding positive and pleasant natural experiences. Yeah, we are such weird creatures, us humans. I can see Natasha's cat's tail. I find that rather amusing. Yeah. Anyway, yes, I think we're getting near to the end of the session as well. So there's time for just one more comment, perhaps. Or if nobody else, I'll make the comment. Okay, so as I said, tomorrow we'll sort of just touch base again with what we've been doing today, or some aspects of that, and then we'll start to explore. Well, we'll start to explore the body further, and begin to find more sense of spaciousness in our body experience, and that can be a natural lead into the so-called formless states. The arupa, which also I'd say, especially the first two, are quite accessible. And the good news is you don't necessarily have to go through the Rupa dhyanas to access the Arupa states. But we'll attempt to do that. So that's what we've got on the cards for tomorrow. So enjoy the rest of your afternoon and evening, and see you tomorrow morning.